I had developed an association with dread as a result of the pungent aroma of rancid coffee and antiquated paper that permeated the lawyer's office. I sat in a plush leather chair that resembled a throne of judgment, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. Mr. Albright, a man whose face appeared permanently etched with polite sympathy, shuffled a stack of documents across the mahogany desk. Charles and Vivian, my parents, were virtually vibrating with anticipation to my left. My father, a man who carried his ambition like a tailored suit, continued to smooth down his already perfect tie. My mother, a woman who measured value in carats and square footage, touched her alligator skin satchel with a manicured finger. They were a representation of affluence that was lamenting. A couple in lament for the loss of a dear sister would be evident to anyone who observes them. Vultures were observed anticipating the feast. By this, I was the stain on the lens, the shadow in the corner of that portrait. Sophia Lancaster, the daughter who is inconvenient. I was a disappointment from the instant I was born. Charles' desired heir was not a male. Vivian was unable to exhibit the flawlessly poised doll at her charity luncheons. I was simply myself. Perpetually in the way, observant and quiet, my Aunt Eleanor was the sole individual who had ever fully observed me. She was not merely my aunt, she was my refuge. Eleanor was the one who taught me how to read, how to bake lopsided cookies, and how to believe that my voice, no matter how quiet, mattered, while my parents were preoccupied with ascending the social hierarchy. She emanated a fragrance of lavender and compassion, and her embraces were the soul sanctuary had ever known. I felt as though as the final ray of light had been extinguished in my world when she passed away last week. And now we were assembled for the reading of her will. My parents' grief, if you could call it that, had been swiftly supplanted by a fervent excitement. Eleanor had been a savvy businesswoman, transforming a modest inheritance into a veritable empire. $10 million. The number had been whispered between my parents for days, a mantra of avarice. They were under the impression that it belonged to them. They had already allocated the funds in their minds. A new yacht for Charles and a modest expansion of Vivian's holiday residence. They had scarcely communicated with Eleanor in the past 5 years, except when they required a loan. However, they were her sole living relatives in addition to me. They did not consider me to be significant. We are here to effectuate the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance. Mr. Albright began, his voice some low, somber drone. As you are aware, my mother applied a silk handkerchief to a dried eye. She murmured, "Dear Eleanor," her voice dripping with manufactured grief. She was perennially exceedingly generous. Gravely, my father nodded. A member of the family who is indispensable. He directed a pointed glance at me, a silent reminder of my status as the family freeloader. She was aware of whom she could rely on. I retreated further into the chair, yearning to dissolve into the leather. I had no expectations. Perhaps a small memento, a piece of jewelry, or something to commemorate her by. That is all I desired. Mr. Albright cleared his throat and commenced reading. He reviewed the customary legal terminology, formal declarations, and bequests to her staff, housekeeper, and gardener. The tension in my parents increased with each name. Charles's leg began to bounce. The rhythm of Vivian's finger tapping against her purse became increasingly frenzied. "And now," Mr. Albright said, halting for dramatic effect, "we reach the majority of the estate. To my sister, Vivian Lancaster, and my dearest brother-in-law, Charles." My parents' features were veiled by avarice as they leaned forward. This concluded the matter, the grand prize. I depart with my most cherished memories and the aspiration that they will discover joy in their current possessions. The silence that ensued was deafening. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, with each second resembling a hammer strike. My father's face, which had been ablaze with avarice, gradually transformed into a blotchy, furious red. My mother's smile, which was meticulously crafted, initially halted before ultimately disintegrating. What? Charles' voice cracked as he spewed. What is the intended meaning of that? Is this a joke? Mr. Albright maintained his tranquility. He adjusted his spectacles and proceeded. He paused once more, and his eyes met mine for the first time. The remainder of my estate, which includes all properties, stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, totals approximately $10 million. I entrust the entirety of this to my cherished niece. Sophia Lancaster thought the earth was tipped. My airways were evacuated of air. I fixed my gaze on him, certain that I hadn't misunderstood the conversation. Who am I? It is impossible. It was an error. Nevertheless, Mr. Albright proceeded to slide a letter across the desk and towards me. It was written in Eleanor's refined, well-known style. My name was prominently displayed on the front. My father was ejected from his throne. Impossible. He roared, his voice reverberating throughout the diminutive office. She is incapable of accomplishing that. We are her family. Sophia is a juvenile nobody. She would be unable to determine what to do with a mere 10 cents, let alone $10 million. She possesses a like quality. Vivian's voice rose to a hysterical pitch as she shrieked. The meticulously crafted face out of the grieving socialite had crumbled, revealing the unsightly, grasping woman that lay beneath. Thus, she poisoned Eleanor in order to harm us. Her care and upbringing were our responsibility. Who was responsible for my upbringing? The words caused a bitter laugh to rise in my larynx. I was clothed and fed by you. Certainly, however, you did not raise me. I'm walking by this. You were tolerant of my presence. You failed to acknowledge my presence. I was left feeling as though I was a specter in my own home by you. As I opened the letter, my palms were trembling. Sophia, my dearest, my time has arrived if you are currently reading this. My dear daughter, please refrain from weeping for me. I have led a full existence. My sole regret is that I did not have the opportunity to spend more time with you. I have observed you develop in a household where you were regarded as an afterthought and a burden, despite the efforts of those in your vicinity to extinguish it. I observed your quiet strength, compassion, and light. Sophia, they are deluded by their avarice. They perceive prosperity as a destination, a prize that must be acquired. However, you, my darling, possess a heart that comprehends its genuine purpose. Money serves as an instrument. It has the capacity to construct or demolish. It would have been a weapon of vanity and extravagance in their possession. I am confident that it will be a positive influence in your hands. This is not merely an inheritance. It is your liberation. It is an opportunity to create a life that is uniquely yours, a life that is characterized by love and purpose, a life that you so dearly deserve. Refrain from allowing them to intimidate you. Do not allow them to cause you to question your own abilities. You are the sole individual in whom I have confidence to continue my legacy, which is not one of fortune, but rather one of compassion. Be courageous. Experience joy. I want you to be aware that I will always adore you. With affection, your Aunt Eleanor. The words were obscured by the tears that poured down my face. But the financial aspect, was not the primary concern. This was the subject, visibility, loving. being regarded as trustworthy. It was everything I had ever desired. What exact words are being used? Vivian demanded, attempting to remove the letter from my possession. I clasped it to my bosom. It is confidential? Ah, private. Charles' visage contorted with fury as he scoffed. That money is our birthright. You are a juvenile who is unworthy and unappreciative. Do you comprehend that you will transfer it to us? You owe us that much. He advanced toward me with a menacing stride, elevating his hand. I trembled, as if a lifetime of conditioning had compelled me to coil up into a ball. Subsequently, I perceived the wrinkles in Aliner's letter as they touched my chest. Be courageous. I stood up, my legs quivering, but remaining steady. No, I replied, my voice scarcely a whisper, but it penetrated his fury like a knife. What did you say? My voice grew stronger as a result of the pure shock of my own defiance. As I repeated, I said no. I will not provide you with a single cent. Pa, you ungrateful brat? Vivian burst into a shriek. After all that we have done for you, we provided you with a roof over your head. I corrected her, my voice cold and clear. You provided me with a house. You did not provide me with a residence. Eleanor executed the action. This is precisely what she desired. Charles snarled, his finger pointing toward the door, and commanded, exit. Remove yourself from our lives. You are no longer our daughter. The words were intended to be a blade to pierce me. Additionally, they would have done so 1 month ago. However, they were now akin to a key that was being turned in a lock. Independence. Mr. Albright's voice was abruptly interrupted by the word, wait. He was displaying a solitary sheet of paper. There is one final codicil to the will. My parents' words were frozen, their eyes alight with a fleeting glimmer of optimism. It is possible that there was a loophole. Mr. Albright gazed directly at them with a bleak expression. The will stipulates that the entire inheritance, including the last dollar, will be immediately forfeited and donated to the National Association for the Support of Abused and Neglected Children. If any party formally contests the will, challenges the benefactor, or causes any legal trouble for my niece, Sophie Lancaster. But the color of my father's visage subsided. By this, my mother let out a small, strangled gasp and slumped back into her chair, her hand clutching her pearls. They were imprisoned. Their avarice had become their own prison. If they embraced their daughter's good fortune, they could accumulate millions. Alternatively, they could be left with nothing if they engage in a struggle. The exquisite irony was that they would prefer to have nothing than to witness me possessing everything. However, the likelihood of losing it all to charity was too high. They were absolutely and utterly defeated. My father's eyes were filled with an almost unbearable animosity as he gazed at me. He recognized the origin of all of his issues. He observed the girl who had snatched his future. He failed to observe his daughter. He never possessed it. Without glancing back, I exited that office. The air in the city, which is typically thick with exhaust fumes, was refreshing and pure. For the first time in 22 years, I felt as though I could finally breathe. Their expectations, disappointments, and oppressive presence had been alleviated. I was followed out the door by my father's final words. You will return in a state of scurrying. You will be unsuccessful and will possess nothing. I halted on the sidewalk and then swung around. A pitiful, deflated figure, he was standing in the doorway. You are incorrect, I stated, my tone remaining level. You are the one who is devoid of anything. You have just forfeited $10 million as a result of your inability to tolerate my joy. right now, who is the one who is failing? I did not anticipate a response. I summoned a taxi, and as it accelerated from the curb, I observed my reflection in the window. I appeared to be distinct. The anxiety that had been my constant companion had vanished. It was replaced by a fleeting glimpse of something novel, something that evoked a strong sense of optimism. The initial weeks were a haze. I relocated from my parents' residence, which was a sterile mansion with an excessively spotless and cold atmosphere, to a modest yet sunny apartment in the heart of the city. I spent days wandering through the city by this, rediscovering a world that I had previously only observed from the back seat of a chauffered vehicle. I purchased coffee from street vendors, consumed hot dogs in the park, and sat on benches to observe individuals living their lives. It was thrilling. The sum of $10 million was held in a bank account, a staggering figure that appeared to be more of concept than a tangible actuality. In accordance with their custom, my parents' attempt to invalidate the will without formally contesting it. Intimidating letters were sent by their attorneys. They relentlessly contacted me, alternately issuing venomous threats and saccharine appeals. I entrusted Mr. Albright with the entirety of the matter. I had concluded my interactions with them. I discovered myself outside the old community center on a rainy Tuesday where Eleanor had previously volunteered. I entered on an impulse. The location was a controlled pandemonium hive. Children were frolicking, giggling, and shouting. Volunteers were assisting with homework, serving snacks, and organizing activities with patients. I observed children who appeared fatigued and who appeared apprehensive. However, they all appeared to be in good health. I recollected a narrative that Eleanor had shared with me. She encountered a young child who had been raised in a deplorable environment. He never spoke. Instead, he sat in a corner and drew images of monster for a year. Eleanor sat with him on a weekly basis, refraining from exerting any pressure, but simply being present. One day, he drew a knight and presented it to her. He had murmured, "That is you. You ensure that the monsters are kept at bay." That was the moment when it dawned on me. The objective. Sophia, money is an instrument. I am confident that it will be a positive force in your control. No, I was not a socialite. I was not an entrepreneur. I was the child who grew up in the shadows. I was aware of the sensation of being despised and invisible. I have the potential to deter the beasts. I met with Mr. Albright and a group of benefactors and financial advisors the following day. I did not desire a penthouse or a vessel. I desired to construct something, a basis, a place of refuge. We referred to it as the Eleanor Project. Its objective was straightforward: to offer long-term support, secure housing, and resources to children and young adults who were attempting to flee toxic family environments. We would provide them with more than just a place to sleep. We would provide them with mentoring, education, rehabilitation, and a pathway to a future they could create for themselves. The work was both profoundly restorative and all-consuming. I felt as though I was retroactively saving myself. With each grant we approved and each child we assisted in placing in a secure home. I encountered children who had endured atrocities that were beyond my comprehension. However, their fortitude humbled me. Sophia Lancaster, the unwanted daughter, was no longer my identity. I served as the director of the Eleanor Project. I had a purpose. My parents' funds ultimately exhausted approximately 1 year later. Charles's poor investments, in conjunction with Vivian's insatiable desire to preserve her appearance, had exhausted their accounts. The mansion was subject to foreclosure. We repossession of the vehicles occurred. The acquaintances who were unreliable disappeared overnight. One evening, they unexpectedly arrived at my residence. It appeared that they were diminished. My father's costly suit was creased. The meticulously applied makeup was unable to conceal the desperation in my mother's eyes as her face was emaciated. My father's voice was devoid of its customary arrogance as he began to speak. Sophia, we must engage in a conversation. They attempted to appeal to my sense of familial obligation, which they had spent my entire life endeavoring to undermine. They discussed forgiveness and the possibility of second chances. They declined to extend an apology. They refrained from acknowledging any misconduct. They merely desired a favor. I listened attentively, my heart remaining a cold, unmoving stone in my bosom. Upon their completion, I transferred a document across the coffee table. This is a trust. I clarified. I have configured it for you. It will be sufficient to cover the cost of a modest apartment, groceries, and essential living expenses. The landlord and utility companies will receive the funds directly. You will receive a modest monthly stipend to cover personal expenses. The paper appeared to be heavily coated in poison to Vivian. A stipend? Would you like us to survive on an allowance similar to children? Do you wish for me to provide you with a blank check so that you may spend it once more? My voice was even as I countered. This is more than you deserve. I am not undertaking this task on your behalf. I am engaging in this activity for my own benefit. I'm undertaking this action in order to definitively conclude this chapter of my life and be assured that I have acted in a manner that is consistent with human rights. Accept it or reject it. They seized it. They were unable to make a decision. However, the atmosphere of the room was tainted by their humiliation. My father turned to me as they departed, his eyes ablaze with resentment. You believe that you are significantly superior to us, don't you? Playing the saint with Eleanor's money, I stated I am employing it to assist others. What would you have done with it? He was unable to provide a response. Nevertheless, their defeat was not the conclusion. It was solely the commencement of a novel form of conflict. They made the decision to attack the only thing I had left, my reputation, as they were unable to access the money. The initial article was published 1 week later. The article was published in a shady online tabloid with a headline that read, O RPLBI on IRSDLs 5 Minartunani, LIASELDROY parent Destiny. The narrative depicted me as a manipulative gold digger who had preyed on a senile old woman and subsequently cruelly expelled the loving parents who had reared her, resulting in a grotesque caricature. They had distorted every aspect of our lives, portraying their neglect as tough love and my quiet childhood as sullen and difficult. They even included doctored photos of them appearing sad and impoverished outside their old mansion. Other media outlets reported on the incident. Suddenly, my name was ubiquitous. I was subjected to defamation on social media and talk programs. The Eleanor Project experienced a decline in donations. Board members experienced an increase in anxiety. By this, the minors we were attempting to safeguard were now linked to a public scandal. My parents were not merely attempting to inflict harm on me. By this, they were also attempting to undermine the sole positive entity that I had constructed. My initial reaction was to withdraw and await the storm's conclusion. My attorneys recommended that I file a lawsuit for defamation. However, they desired a public, chaotic altercation that would persist for years, thereby maintaining their status as public figures. the act of concealment would be perceived as an admission of culpability. Suing would constitute engaging in their game. I was obligated to engage in an alternative activity. However, I was compelled to respond on my own terms. I reached out to Sarah Jenkins, an investigative journalist who has been awarded the Pulitzer Prize for her unwavering integrity. I did not provide her with a statement. Rather, I provided her with everything: my childhood journals, Eleanor's letters, school documents, and testimony from former housekeepers and tutors who had observed my parents' cold indifference. I provided her with financial records that detailed each loan that Eleanor had granted to them, including those that they never repaid. I provided her with the uncut recording of our final conversation, which took place in my residence. I disclosed every aspect of my existence. I do not desire a puff piece, I informed her. I desire the truth, the complete truth. Allow individuals to make their own decisions. Sarah conducted an investigation for a month. She interviewed my parents, who enthusiastically spun their web of lies, unaware that she already had the evidence to unravel every single one. She conversed with individuals from my past, the board of the Eleanor Project, and even some of the children we had assisted. The article she published was not merely a rebuttal. It was an exposé. The title of the work was The Lancaster Legacy, A Story of Greed, Neglect, and the True Meaning of Inheritance. It was a work of journalism that was entirely compelling, brutal, and factual. It provided a comprehensive account of my parents' financial mismanagement and emotional abuse and their calculated, callous campaign to smear me. It was a stark contrast to the tangible good being accomplished by the Eleanor Project and their falsehoods. Virality ensued from the article. The public's reaction to my parents was immediate and unforgiving. Overnight, they transitioned from being objects of compassion to figures of public ridicule. The one thing they could never overcome, the truth, had obliterated their meticulously crafted narrative. I met with them for the final time in the neutral environment of Mr. Albright's office. It appeared that they were significantly damaged. The fight had vanished from their pupils. It was replaced by a hollow emptiness. I would like you to sign this, I stated, moving a cease and desist letter across the desk. It specifies that you will never mention my name in public again, Bob. You will refrain from contacting me, my foundation, or any individual who is associated with me. You will withdraw your allowance and vanish from my existence. The trust will be dissolved if you violate it. Are you able to comprehend? Vivian began to weep, her weeping being silent and wretched. Charles, gazing at the table with a sallow expression, a scarcely perceptible movement, he nodded once. The documents were signed by them. For the first time, I experienced a momentary pang of sympathy for them as they departed. They had constructed their entire existence on the basis of wealth and prestige. They were rendered insignificant by its absence. They were two empty individuals who were clinging to the detritus, and they did not even have each other. Ironically, the Eleanor Project's most advantageous outcome was the scandal. Donations were received from all corners of the globe. The story's transformation of a traumatic past into a positive future resonated with the audience. The foundation expanded, and we were able to assist hundreds and eventually thousands of children. Emily, a teenage female, was one of them. She arrived at one of our shelters with only a knapsack and the clothing she was currently wearing, having finally escaped a home life that was suffocating her spirit. She was profoundly wounded, intelligent, and fierce. I recognized a significant amount of my earlier self in her. I became her mentor and, in due course, a friend. Her recovery and the resurgence of her dreams were more gratifying than any sum of money. I received a missive a few months after the papers were signed. It was sent by my mother. I was on the brink of discarding it, however. I was averted by an internal force. Sophia, I do not anticipate your forgiveness. I am not deserving of it. I felt as though my existence had come to an end when Charles and I lost the money. Being a Lancaster of a particular status was the foundation of my identity, my relationships, and my purpose. I came to the realization that I was unaware of my identity in the absence of it. I continue to be unable to do so. Observing you on the news, observing the structures you have constructed, you constructed them from scratch. Not from Eleanor's finances, but from her affection. You derived your fortitude from a source that I never provided you with. I apologize, not only for the fabrications, but for all of them. For the girl I never knew how to love. Vivian, the wounds of a lifetime were not miraculously healed by the missive. However, it was a beginning. A gap in the protective wall she had constructed around her heart. I responded with a single sentence. Subsequently, identify a new objective. She did not communicate with me for an extended period of time. One day, I'm walking by this. I came across a brief article in the local newspaper that discussed the recent expansion of a soup kitchen services. The article referenced a new committed volunteer who had played a crucial role in their fundraising efforts. Vivian was her given name. I traveled to the cemetery Sunny on afternoon to pay my respects at Eleanor's burial. The inscription on her headstone was straightforward. Love is the essence of a family. On the grass, I arranged a bouquet of fragrant lavender. I murmured, "Hello, Eleanor. But you were correct. The financial aspect was not the primary concern. It was about the privilege of becoming oneself." Emily, who was then in her first year of college, sat down next to me as I remained seated. She rested her head on my shoulder. "Are you feeling well?" "I am fantastic," I declared, and I meant it. I then came to the realization that Eleanor had bestowed upon me one final gift. She had demonstrated to me that family is not solely defined by the same bloodline. It is about the individuals who attend, the individuals who observe you, who provide you with encouragement, and who adore you for who you are rather than what you possess. I stood on a stage at the annual fundraising gala for the Eleanor Project a year later, gazing out at a multitude of smiling faces. Donors, volunteers, and many of the young people whose lives we had touched. I began with a clear and assertive voice. Say that living well is the best revenge. However, I have since discovered that this is inaccurate. Wealth, status, or the ability to disprove one's adversaries are not indicative of genuine victory. It pertains to benevolence. It involves transforming your suffering into a purpose. My parents desired for me to be diminutive, mute, and imperceptible. I sought retribution by becoming the one thing they never believed I could be, a decent person, rather than by appropriating their fortune. And that is a legacy that is more valuable than any sum of money. The audience responded with thunderous acclaim. However, I was not observing the throng. I was gazing at Emily, who was gleaming at me from the front row. I did not perceive the reflection of a broken child or an orphan billionaire in her eyes. I observed a mentor, a friend, and a survivor, a family. I was eventually able to return home.